Introducing our keynote speaker this evening, Dr. Charles Lineweaver. Dr. Charles Lineweaver obtained his PhD in astrophysics from the University of California in Berkeley in 1994. He is the convener of the Australian National University Planetary Science Institute and holds a joint appointment as an associate professor in the Research School of Astronomy and Astrophysics in the School of Earth Sciences. Dr. Lineweaver was also a member of the COBE satellite team that discovered the temperature fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background. His research projects deal with exoplanet statistics, the recession of the moon, cosmic entropy production, major transition in the cosmic and biological evolution, and cyclogenetic trees. Please welcome Dr. Charles Lineweaver.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Is that right? All right. Can you hear me back there in the back? Yes? All right, everybody. So while she's getting that started, oh, there it is. When I'm in a theater like this, I like to ask questions of the speaker. So anytime I say something that you don't like or you have a question about, just call out. And if it gets too much, I will stifle you. But until that time, please just call out and ask a question. All right, life in the universe, are we alone? This is me, this is my affiliation over here. And there's Australia, that's where we are. Matter of fact, we are right there. That's Australia. Okay, so whenever I give a lecture on Are We Alone, I do a survey. And I ask the audience their opinions. And so, here's the survey. Are we alone? Please raise your hand if you think, yes, we are alone. Okay, about 6, 7. No, we are not alone. Oh, quite a few. And, Okay, now you guys represent the average. Here is what happens. You guys are, your thought, collective thought, is represented by these numbers. Yes, 10%, no. Actually, this group is about 7% here, and maybe about 7% here, and maybe 85 or 6. There. Okay, so after I taught a course called Are We Alone? And I did this survey. And after the course, I am proud to announce the new figures. And they were, yes, 20%, no, 60%, and I'm particularly proud of this. Going from 10 to 20. In other words, I'm going to try to confuse you. I'm going to try to convince you that you really don't know what this question means. Or that we don't know either. What is life and what is intelligence, etc. There is a big cockroach. That's a life form. Leave it alone, I guess, unless you're threatened by it. Okay. So another topic of this talk will be Superman and the Planet of the Apes fallacy. I bought this. Where did I buy that? I bought this in Japan about a week ago. And so I thought I would use it as a demonstration, as a reminder, what kind of reminds me of what we're looking for in the universe. So that's another, well, anyway, let's move on. So this is my favorite cartoon. It says, eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce. And then this guy with his big brain doesn't know what it's all about, and he has to ask, what's it all about? So if he had a smaller brain, maybe he would know it's eat, survive, reproduce. But because his brain is so big and he thinks he's so special, he can ask this question in a different way. That makes him, many of us think that makes him good and able to have more insight, and some of us think it gives him less insight because everybody else seems to know the answer. Now, there's another question we can ask with our big brains, and that is, are we alone? And that's what we'll be talking about today. Any questions so far? Straightforward? No problems? Okay, now there are a lot of Earth-like planets. There are about 10 to the 22 in the observable universe. And the universe looks like it's spatially infinite. So we got a lot of planets out there. This is something that's been the result of recent progress, and here is that progress. So on this plot, we have the orbital period of planets, and on this, we have the mass of those planets. So our solar system is Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, there's Saturn. So that's our solar system. All of these planets orbit the same star, our sun. Now, these dots, and these different colored dots, have been planets around other stars that were detected with this whole slew of detection techniques. Each one of these detection techniques has a different selection function. They have different sensitivities, but almost all of them are more sensitive up here and have almost zero sensitivity here. That's a result of just your ability to detect something. Question?
What do you mean by the observable universe? Because that obviously colours our judgment.
Yeah, so the question is, what is the observable universe? The simplest version of the observable universe is the speed of light times 13.8 billion years, which is the age of the universe. Now, that would be the size, with 13.8 times the speed of light. You can do the calculations. It turns out to, I guess, 13.8 billion light years is the answer. However, that's not the right answer because the universe is expanding. If you include the expansion, the radius of the observable universe is about 45 billion light years. And that's simply because as light is running from very far away, the universe is expanding, expanding, expanding. And so although it's only been going for 13.8 billion years, the distance it has traveled is longer than 13.8 billion light years because it's been expanding during the travel time by a factor of about 3. Any other questions? Okay, so this is a lovely plot. This was made, so here's Jupiter-like planets and here like Earth-like planets. And you can see there are not many Earth-like planets, at least not in 2012 when this plot was made. But many of you know that we exoplanet hunters have been very active, and particularly with the transit Kepler satellite. And these red ones are the Kepler, but watch what happened in 3 years. We went from that plot to this plot. So a whole big new cloud, and that's why whenever somebody discovers one planet or 2 planets, it doesn't make the news anymore. Recall about 10 years ago, whenever anybody detected any planet, ho-ho, it made the newspapers, and you read it. Planet detected, planet detected. Well, after all these statistics, now when somebody detects a planet, so what? Where is it? Is it over here? If it's not over here, it's not an Earth-like planet, we don't care about it. So you have to, if you're going to make the news, you have to have an Earth-like planet in the habitable zone of its host star. I should say that not all these are individual planets. Some of these planets are orbiting the same star. I haven't put lines in there. If I did, it would make it so complicated. So occasionally, maybe that one is the only planet around a star, but maybe this one and this one are orbiting the same star. So it's a little bit more complicated than is presented here. The bottom line is we're really making progress in detecting exoplanets, planets in orbit around other stars, but because of selection effects, we can only find things here, and it's very hard to find things here and to the lower right. That's simple because over here, the more massive ones, and here, the short period ones. So if you're massive and short period, then it's easier to be detected. It's kind of like if you put Jupiter near Mercury's orbit, Jupiter would pull the sun around much more strongly. Any questions about this lovely scientific plot? This is the most difficult plot. But you understand what it's period of a planet, mass of a planet. Lots of progress, comparison, boom, boom. Okay? All right, so right now the main progress is trying to increase the amount of planets right here on this plot. The TESS satellite that's going up in a few, I guess this year sometime, unfortunately, it will only look for 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, or 30 days, and so it won't be able to get out here. It'll only produce lots and lots of things right here. And so in terms of finding Earth-like planets, it's not going to be that great. Except for the planets that are around M-dwarfs, which have habitable zones, with periods of the planet about 30 days or so. Okay, next. So the new default is every star probably has some kind of planetary system. So when you go out at night after this talk, look up at the sky, you say, there's a planet, there's a star, some type of planetary system probably is there. Another star, same thing, same thing, same thing. And that's what this artist, if you look very carefully, you can see this white, the orbits of planets around stars. New default, keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so this is progress that we've made. So in the last few decades, we have found a lot of planets. Here's some planets, and then, we found a whole bunch of other planets. But we've also, by looking around on Earth, we have found, by examining extreme environments, really hot places, really cold places, really acidic places, really basic places, we have increased the range in which we know terrestrial life inhabits. And that's what this increasing of this blue oval is. And what we're hoping is that by finding lots of extraterrestrial planets that are like the Earth in the habitable zone, and by finding wider and broader a range of parameters in which we know life already exists on Earth, well then hopefully there'll be some type of overlap. And of course that's what this talk is about. Does this overlap exist? Is there life elsewhere in the universe? Isn't this remarkable progress? Okay, self-congratulatory too. Okay, so anyway, as a cosmologist, I can make a plot like this. This is the entire history of the universe on one plot, and as you can see, astronomy turns into biology. And we call that cosmic evolution. We start out with the Big Bang. It makes overdensities of hydrogen and helium. Those overdensities collapse into big red stars that quickly, after 5 million years or so, go boom, produce all this other material, which includes oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, etc. If it goes into a small star, like an M star, they live for much longer than the age of the universe, and so they don't go boom. So they don't contribute to this recycling and to the creation of these elements, which we think are necessary, because what are you made out of? You're mostly water. What's that? H2O. The H was there at the beginning. You can see that. H was here. But the O was not. The O had to be produced in these big blue stars, so it's important that a bunch of big blue stars go boom in order to produce the O so you can have water. And then the other elements that you need are carbon, for example. That too has to be produced by a big star. The sun, for example, is going to burn hydrogen into helium. That's what it's doing now. It's going to burn helium into carbon and oxygen, but it won't go beyond that. And so if you need nitrogen, you can't rely on stars as small as the sun to do that. That's kind of interesting because the sun is more massive than 95% of all stars. So 95% of all stars are here and here. They're not doing what these big things are doing. We need those big short-lived stars to pollute the universe with these carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur before you can talk about a complex chemistry that relies on the abundance of those elements. Okay, nothing problematic there. Okay, now, so this is one way to show the entire history of the universe on one plot. And I should mention that these are thanks to our biological friends. They create these trees, and then they tell us who's related to whom. Like, here we are, and here's a fungi. So we are more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. But because I drew this about 10 years ago, I have mistakenly put fungi and plants more closely related than they are to animals. So that's my mistake, old plot. Okay, and for you, any biologists here? So, okay, biologists, if you should know that animals and fungi together are called, fancy word for this, animals and fungi, they're in a group. They're called opisthecons. Okay, you should tell your biology teachers to teach you that. Anyway, everybody in this room is an opisthecon and nobody knows it. Isn't that paradoxical? You all know you're mammals and vertebrate, but you don't know that you're an opisthecon. How about eukaryotes? Are you a eukaryote? All right, you are a eukaryote. Okay. About half the audience knows they're eukaryotes. No one knows they're a opisthecon. Everybody knows they're a mammal. Anyway, this is our identity. It's important. So, again, on one plot was this history of the universe. But another way I can do it on two plots, it's like a movie. 4.5 billion years ago, this is what the sun looked like. 4.5 billion years later, you have this. This is funny, it's also true, and it's kind of quirky. And we would, as astrobiologists, we would like to know, did this happen elsewhere? What happens elsewhere? We know that there's hydrogen, molecular hydrogen and helium. We know there's clouds. We know that stars are forming. We know these clouds are polluted with the elements that are necessary to make life. We know that there are lots and lots of many, many Earths. Some of them will be in the habitable zone. We know all this now, but what we don't know is how common something as quirky as this is. What are the selection pressure on life when it first gets started, and where does it go? Where does it evolve? How does it evolve? Those are things we don't know very much about, and I'll talk about that in this talk. And these are the elements that you are made up of at about the 99%. So hydrogen, oxygen, this is like the water. Carbon, life is carbon-based. And then we have nucleic acids, they're amino acids. The amine, that means has nitrogen in it. And then there's phosphorus, like an ATP, the energy currency in your bodies. And then sulfur, a couple of amino acids have that. So that's what you are made of. You're made of those 6 elements at the 98% level. Say again? There is some iron, but it's subdominant to the sulfur. If you're talking in terms of number of atoms. If you're talking about in terms of mass of atoms, I bet that statement is false. There's a distinction to be made between mass and number. So iron is important at the origin of life, but subdominant to these. Okay, now if you want to talk about life on Earth, you should get an idea of what life on Earth is like. What is it? All of it together. And this is a lovely plot that was made in 1997 based on ribosomal RNA. And in all of your bodies, you have ribosomes. They're the organelles that take an mRNA, a messenger RNA. They go, jig, 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 and then it produces a protein. Your body has them everywhere, and that's how your body makes itself, by taking the information from, well, actually, there's the DNA. The DNA makes a piece of mRNA that gets out of the nucleus, the nuclear membrane, and then goes into the organelles, and then go, jig, 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 and that produces the protein, and then that goes somewhere. And based on the sequence of part of the ribosome, the RNA in the ribosome, that's what this tree has been made of. How closely related are you? Now, here's Homo. This is Homo sapiens. And here's Caprinus. This is a mushroom. And here's Zea. That's corn. So you can see that animals and fungi and plants are a tiny, tiny tip of the variety of life on Earth. And that's important because usually you get taught in biology class animals, you get taught here. And matter of fact, if you go to most biology departments, they study post-Cambrian biology. Post-Cambrian biology is from here to here. That's what 90%, 95% of the effort of biology departments is about. Notice that misses a large fraction of what life is. And I should tell you a little secret. This doesn't even include viruses, because viruses don't have ribosomes. So we're pretending that viruses don't exist. So this is already a prejudiced view of what life is. It's too narrow. But it's very broad compared to what you may have been taught in high school. Excuse me? Yes, okay, so let's talk. So why did I put this here? I put this here because I think the root of our tree of life, that's right here, the root, rather than the tips of the branches. Now, this tree was created by sequencing extant organisms, organisms that are alive today. Not fossil organisms, but organisms. Every single name here belongs to something that's alive today. That's why you can only do that because you need the sequence from this living creature. If it dies, you can't get it out of a fossil for very long, maybe for, I don't know, 10 years or 1,000 years, but not very long. Anyway, so the point of showing you this is that the root of our tree of life, rather than the tips of the branches, remember the tips of the branches are these things with the names, they're extant organisms, organisms that are alive. The root gives us a better idea of what ET, extraterrestrial life, might be like. So it's an idea. And where does that idea come from? This is the logic. The most fundamental features of mice are the features they share with all mammals, i.e. with us. And the most fundamental features of mammals are the features we share with all eukaryotes. So mice are some little thing here, and then mammals are here, and then all these green is eukaryotes. And the most fundamental features of eukaryotes are the features we eukaryotes share with all terrestrial life. And among the most fundamental features of terrestrial life forms are the features we share with all life in the universe. So what I'm suggesting is, as we go back further and further to the root, we approach chemistry. This is where biochemistry started. And biochemistry, or at least geochemistry, the types of places of Earth-like planets, will be similar. They're made out of the same stuff. And so if geochemistry and the gradients, the thermal gradients and the temperature gradients and the redox potentials that we think were associated with the origin of life on this planet, we have no reason to believe that they weren't elsewhere. I think we have a lot of reason to believe that kangaroos are not elsewhere and we are not elsewhere, but to pretend that at the origin of life, the sources of energy are not elsewhere doesn't float. So that's why I think it's important to understand, to make a best guess at what this is, because that, I think, will be our best guess at how life elsewhere, what it would look like, how would it behave, what kind of metabolism it would have. Why? Because these things are quirky, and as you go back and closer to the root, you get more deterministic, hard physics and chemistry and geochemistry that is at the root here. Anybody want to disagree with that? Push back on this somehow? Yeah. Conrad.
With that explanation, are you taking into account the extremophiles that we find in, like, thermal vents that have a different kind of chemistry to the way we live?
Yes.
So in
matter of fact, that was the reason we created this plot. You see, we created a thermometer out of the tree of life. So this is work I did with Schwartzman. And so what we said, you see this 60 degrees? When you take a shower, Conrad, your shower temperature is less than 60 degrees. If it were higher, your skin would denature. So and all the eukaryotes are just like that. We share this with mice, and we share this with euglena and fusarium and all these single-celled eukaryotes. A lot of them are parasitic. But over here, these guys, look at these red ones, they like it above 90 degrees C. As a matter of fact, the record is 121. And you say, well, that's above boiling. Not at the bottom of the ocean. And so that's where these creatures live, 121 degrees Celsius under a lot of pressure. So yes, we included some of the thermodynamic, the temperature, the thermal range of these extremophiles. Cool. Okay, cool. Okay. Got another question back there in the middle? Just speak out loudly, maybe. Loudly. Is there a definition of eukaryotes? Yes, the definition of eukaryotes is that in every cell you are a eukaryote. That means in every cell of your body you have a cell wall, cell membrane, and then inside that your DNA is inside of a nuclear membrane. So your DNA has a separate package. In bacteria, they have cell walls and cell membranes, but they do not have a separate membrane that sequesters their DNA. So that's the difference between these guys are eukaryotes. They have that extra DNA wall, nuclear membrane, and these guys do not. The carry, by the way, means nucleus. U means have. That's how you can remember it that way. Having a nucleus. And these are called prokaryotes, sometimes before the nucleus. Okay, so moving a lot. So that's how we can use life on Earth to try to make guesses, the best guesses we can about life elsewhere. Okay, now here's this lovely picture of a tiny, tiny fraction of the universe. And there's something you should know, and that is, all of these are galaxies. One of these dots is a galaxy except for that one there. These galaxies are just roughly 100,000 light years from end to end. That means if you were a light beam, it would take a light beam 100,000 years to go across. But if you send a rocket, let's say at 10% the speed of light, it would take 10 times longer. 10 times longer than 100,000 is a million. So 10 to the 6. So it would take a rocket traveling at a tenth the speed of light, 1,000,000 years to go from one end of our galaxy to the other. So there it is. 10,000 divided by 0.1 is 10 to the 6. That's how many years it would take for this rocket to go from here to here. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because we're trying to calculate how long would it take to colonize the galaxy. And so the galaxy has been around for about 10 billion years, or 10 to the 10 years. If it takes 1,000,000 years to go around, then we divide this number by this number, and we get the result that this rocket could go back and forth 10,000 times in the history of the galaxy. Now, that's a lot of times for a potentially, extraterrestrial civilization that can make a rocket that goes a tenth the speed of light. That's a lot of possibilities. And because of those possibilities, and because when we look around at the Earth and do archaeological digs, we find our ancestors, we find evidence of our own history, but we do not find the bones of, discarded spacecraft or skeletons that belong to some weird creature, some alien. We find our own remains. And when we look with radio telescopes, we've been doing for 60 years, we hear silence. There's nobody out there chattering away at radio frequencies that we know how to listen to. So the combination of all this information made Enrico Fermi, in 1953, say, where is everybody? Where is everybody? They should be out there. They could easily have colonized the galaxy based on this time calculation. Where are they? We should be digging up spacecraft and picnic debris from aliens who came here, and we haven't found that. So there he is, Enrico Fermi saying, where is everybody? And since then, this where is everybody is known as Fermi's paradox. Now, if you're interested in that, if you're really interested in Paul, you could read these two books. This is called Where is Everybody by Stephen Webb. He's got a new version, just came out, Stephen Webb. He says wonderful things about a couple of papers I've written, so read it. And he gives 75 solutions to the Fermi paradox. In other words, he kind of stamp collects solutions to this Fermi paradox. Some of them are really weird, some of them are more plausible, but it's an interesting read. All right, so Fermi and Hollywood, you can see Hollywood aliens, they have giant brains. Fermi and Hollywood assume that human-like intelligence is a convergent feature of evolution. Now, that's interesting, that's what they do. But I think I want to talk now about the Planet of the Apes fallacy as being the main assumption behind Fermi's paradox. Because remember, in this Fermi's paradox, you have to assume that there are extraterrestrial civilizations who could do this colonization. But if you do not get human-like intelligence that can build spacecraft, then the whole thing falls apart. There's no paradox anymore. That's the solution. They do not exist. So let's look at this Planet of the Apes. Now, this is a movie, and here's Charlton Heston. And he is in a spacecraft, and they're in cryogenic preservation, and the spacecraft goes haywire and lands on some planet. They have no idea where they are. There's a whole bunch of them, maybe 3 or 4. And they get out, and they start breathing. And they got this sensitive equipment, and like a watch, they can tell how long the day is. And the day is 24 hours. And the oxygen content is like 21%. Nitrogen content about 80 or so. And the day is exactly 24 hours long. At least the solar day. And there are horses, and there's corn, and 3 species of other apes, and they have photographic equipment, and they're speaking English. And these scientists do not realize that they're on Earth. They think they're somewhere else. This is like, woo, you have to be on drugs to do this. Anyway, that's the scenario. That's the thing we're supposed to accept. And you can see, oh, by the way, you can see that the gorillas are the militaristic people, and the chimpanzees are like the scientists and the academics, and the orangutans are like the priests.
That's why they got gorilla walking.
Okay. All right, so here's Charlton Heston. He's locked in a cage, and you can see he's got like a kind of key that they had in Victorian England. This is like hairy people here. Okay. And the funny thing is that only at the end of the movie, when Charlton Heston and his babe are riding down the beach, and they see this, do they realize that they're on Earth? Now that's interesting because the idea is that something like this is more quirky than the DNA of humans and horses and corn and English. Okay. So the Planet of the Apes hypothesis is basically like this. They're humans, and we occupy a niche called intelligence, towards which all, or at least some species, evolved. The point of that movie was that the humans had marginalized themselves in World War III, IV, or V that we're going to do sometime soon. I don't know, within the next 1,000 years at least, according to Hawking and other people. According to me, too, I think we're doomed and we're going to kill ourselves very soon. I'm not sure how soon. Anyway, if we don't completely kill ourselves, just marginalize ourselves and everybody goes mute, that's what happened on this planet, on Earth. And so the idea is that after we disappear, then chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans, which are the closest things to us, their closest relatives on Earth, they say, the intelligence niche is no longer inhabited. We're going to evolve into human beings. And that's what this plot is meant to show. Here we are, and we inhabit the intelligence niche, and then here are apes, dogs, sheep, vertebrates with half a brain, then bacteria, worms, fungi, stupid things. And so we fall off here, and apes come up here. That's the idea. I'm glad you're laughing. So the idea, another way to say is, stupid things get smarter, model of animal evolution. Say again?
I'll try that in the class.
Show the movie first. Okay. So another way to characterize this is my adaptive strategy is better than your adaptive strategy. My type of intelligence is better than your type of intelligence. If I do something wrong, then poof, everybody else is going to try to become me. That's what we humans believe when we watch this movie. So the Planet of the Apes hypothesis is there is a human-like intelligence niche, there's selection pressure on other species, including our ancestors, to occupy this niche. In our absence, in a terrestrial setting, or on other planets, some species will evolve into that niche and develop technology. Carl Sagan has called the occupants of this niche the functional equivalent of humans. All right? This is Carl Sagan, one of my heroes. Now, I call it the human-like intelligence niche, not the intelligence niche, because generic intelligence is poorly defined. Each animal species, with or without a brain, seems to have its own version of intelligence. Our human-like intelligence, unlike any other type of intelligence on Earth, has allowed us to build radio telescopes and given us the ability to hear and be heard across interstellar distances. This ability that we humans have and that we are able to look for in others is a species-specific characteristic. Now, for those of you who don't understand the word species-specific, that means it's only in our species. I'll say that again. This ability to build that kind of thing is only in our species. So it's a species-specific characteristic. And if we're looking for these things elsewhere, we are looking for a species-specific characteristic. Now, this is a plot that shows what evolution is trying to do. It's trying to build, it's called the Schwarzeneggerization of life. And so you can see that life from the very beginning tried to become Schwarzenegger. And then plants, plants are over here, they don't even matter. Fungi are not even on here. And then the insects over here. And you can see that everything evolved. I mean, this is a vision 1959 before we had phylogenetic trees, but we put it together to represent our mind view of our place in the universe. This is retarded. This is stupid. This is vain, egocentric. It makes no sense. Matter of fact, I showed you about 5 slides ago the new version of this, if you throw out the viruses. And humans do not look like they're in the middle. They're a tiny, tiny branch in the eukaryotes. Remember that? Okay. So please, I'm putting it up here. I should get rid of it. Boom. Now, Frank Drake. This is Frank Drake. He's a colleague. He's a radio astronomer. And this is his equation. So he writes that on the board every morning. This is the number of communicable civilizations in our galaxy. This is the star formation rate, the fraction of those stars with planets, the number of those that are Earth-like, the little e there, fraction of those that have life, little l, fraction of that life that is intelligent, fraction of those who want to communicate for C, and then the lifetime of that civilization of intelligent, communicable people. Now, I sat on a plane about, 10 years ago. I was in a plane going to a meeting of ISOL, which stands for the International Society for the Study of the Origin of Life, ISOL. And I was flying from Mexico City to Oaxaca, where the meeting was. And I happened to have a seat next to Frank. I said, Frank, I've been teaching my students about your equation. I said, Frank, why do you think there are intelligent aliens who have built radio telescopes? What do you think is the strongest evidence for the idea that human-like intelligence is a convergent feature of evolution? Now remember, he's a radio astronomer. And I'm asking him a question about biology here. And he says, read Harry Jerrison. I had never heard of Harry Jerrison, so I said, I better read Harry Jerrison. So the main part of Harry Jerrison's work is this plot. Here we have millions of years ago. Here's today. Here's 50 million years ago, 100 million years ago, 200 million years ago. So this is like evolution over the past 200 million years of what? Of encephalization quotient. Essentially the size of your brain divided by the mass of your body. How encephalated you are. And so he says, well, here we are up here. And so he said, oh, look at that plot. See? EQ gets bigger with time. That's the whole point. And if you don't think about this too much, it makes sense. If you think about it a little bit more carefully, it makes 0 sense. And here I want to show you why. Because what we've done here is picked out a trait that we know that we have the biggest of all life forms. So imagine that you're an elephant. And you say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to make a plot because I want to be unique, just like you humans are unique. I want to be unique too. So I'm going to make a plot of, let's see, my skin is thick, but rhinoceroses have thick skin too. I know, I'm going to make a plot of nasalization quotient, the length of my nose compared to the length of my body. And that's the one that I'm the master of. And so when you do that, here's the elephant thinking, oh, I'm going to make a nasalization. There are other things with noses, but if this elephant plots the history of the nasalization quotient of his ancestors and closely related things, this is what you get. Notice it's not too dissimilar to the plot I just showed you. The point is that if you take any variable and you know now, and you know that you're the maximum, that puts an incredible bias into your data that you will get something that looks like that. Because you've chosen the y-axis such that you are up here on the upper right-hand side. So this plot that Jerison, I think, does not show this. You have a question, sir?
Are you saying that the brain developments are in their noses?
I'm saying that the brain development is... I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
The brain developments are in their noses.
No, I'm not saying that the brain development is in their nose. I'm just saying that any species can find a characteristic of which they are the biggest or the best or the largest or the smallest or the thickest or the thinnest, and then plot it on the y-axis, and they will get a plot that looks something like that. That's called a selection effect, not science. Yes?
So you can make yourself on the top, but you're going to arrange the other animals, right, on the same chart.
They are in these are the other animals right here.
So if you plot humans came later than elephants, so it will be on the right side.
What do you mean humans came later than elephants? Who told you that humans came later than elephants? We're all existing now, so we're here at the same time.
Okay, my question is, you are plotting against who came now and who came later, right? That's the x-axis.
No. These are all things that are existent, or I cheated a little bit because these things some of them are extinct, but they're so close to not being extinct that I plotted them here. These are all, for all intents and purposes, the existent things here. These dots are when they split off from each other. These are the common ancestor of these guys and these guys are right here. Common ancestor of this and these guys are right here.
Yeah, right. So x-axis is like
Time. X-axis is time.
So there will be lots and lots of animals who have, the length of nose, this ratio less than elephant.
Yes, there they all are, right
So
there.
they will appear towards the right of the x-axis. Where the elephant is, right?
When you say appear, this is not the appearance of this is the division between this group and this group. It's not the appearance of this group.
Oh, okay.
So when we divided from chimpanzees about 6 million years ago, it wasn't the appearance of humans, it was the division between what became chimps and what became humans.
So it's just the evolution of the elephant shown on a timeline.
The evolution of relative
okay.
nose size shown on a timeline. We'll talk about this later. Okay, moving on. Now, Frank Drake, here's his equation. In the Drake equation, we're looking for intelligent aliens with language. We're looking for aliens who want to communicate. We're looking for aliens who can build spaceships and radio telescopes. We're looking for aliens who know more than we do. We're looking for aliens who can solve our problems. I know this because I've asked a lot of people, what kind of aliens would you like to meet? Obviously, we're looking for ourselves, or better versions of ourselves that we can aspire to become. Obviously, we're looking for Superman. And this is my model of Superman right here. It used to remind me of what we're looking for in outer space. We're looking for our own species. Okay, so Superman is a species Kryptonian. He comes from Krypton. I didn't know this. His birth name was Kal-El, and adopted name Clark Kent. He has abilities. I knew about X-ray vision. I didn't know about some of these other things. I knew he was strong. I didn't know he was going to live longer. I don't know how long Superman's going to live. Freezing breath, I didn't know he had. Anyway, he's a Superman, and we have put him, well, here's his story. He came to Earth as a baby in a space capsule from this planet Krypton, which was self-destructing for some reason. And then he rescued Lois Lane and other people. And then he fell in love with Lois Lane and other people, Lana Lane. And then he had to deal with kryptonite and the women's movement. Okay, we'll start planning our wedding. And then they got married. This is a special all-wedding issue. And interestingly, she had to marry Clark Kent, and she knew it was really Superman, so they had like a secret tryst. And then Superman from Krypton and Lois Lane from Earth are the same species because they had a child. There's the child, Superboy, and the corresponding domestic issues, although it didn't do him much harm here. My point here is that we humans are so vain and biologically naive that we easily imagine that our species would evolve elsewhere. Footnote, please consult your local biologist about this idea. If symptoms continue, read more biology. There is no example on Earth of a single species evolving separately anywhere. Of course, all life has a common ancestor, so that statement is has to be thought about a little bit more carefully. But when you have two continents and two species, you do not get convergent evolution so compatible that you're the same species. That's what we're to imagine about Superman. That's a crazy idea. When you see Superman, every time you see Superman, think of, that's a crazy idea. That's pre-Darwinian, non-biological, it doesn't work. But when we see Superman, oh, that's a kind of interesting idea, it's kind of cool, let me go to the movies, I want to see more, I want to see more, I want to see more. Why? Because, hey, we're so vain, we love it. It's like being flattered. You know, you can't get enough of it sometimes unless it gets too obvious. I'm trying to make it too obvious for you so that I want to spoil Superman for you for the rest of your lives. Really. Okay. Now, another thing that reminds me of this Superman thing is Prester John. Here's a picture of Prester John, sometimes called Presby Johannes. And for Christian Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, the world of Muslims and the pagans of the Orient was vast, threatening, and unexplored. Enter the legend of Prester John, who supposedly ruled over the Nestorian Christian nation in the East. Explorers went looking for Prester John, i.e., they went looking for themselves. Here's another map of Prester John. They didn't know exactly where he was, so here they put him in Africa, in Ethiopia and Somalia here. But anyway, it says Presbyter Johannes, but I can't read the rest. All right, so looking for Prester John, looking for extraterrestrial civilizations, imagining that chimps could evolve into humans, imagining the universe to be filled with human-like intelligence, our search for ourselves may be emotionally rewarding, maybe even necessary, but it's not a very scientific way to motivate our exploration of the universe. That's kind of like a moral lesson from this lecture. On the other hand, think of Christopher Columbus. He found some great things, he explored, but he got there because he got the money from Queen Isabel, who he was flirting with, and then he underestimated the size of the Earth by a factor of 2, and if the New World hadn't been there, his whole crew would have probably died. So it was kind of a crazy suppositions, bad motivation, but boom, he went somewhere no one else had been, and actually no other European had been, right? And so he did some good exploration. So maybe, crazy motivation, if it motivates you to explore in weird ways, is useful. Now, a little bit more science now, less comic books. How long did it take us to get this brain? It took us about 2 or 3 million years. We can plot our ancestors like this. This is 3 million years ago today. Bum, 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 cranial capacity increases. We know the time scale, 2 to 3 million years. Now, there have been half a dozen long-duration experiments in vertebrate evolution, and they've already tested the Planet of the Apes hypothesis, that creatures evolve towards, being able to speak English and doing technology and being like humans, evolving into the human-like intelligence niche. Those names of these experiments are called Australia and Madagascar and India, South America, Laurasia. Anything that was freely floating for a long period of time was effectively a long-duration experiment in what happens to vertebrates when they evolve without being suppressed by some other thing like a human being that would kick them out of the intelligence niche. Humans were not on these places until only 50,000 years ago. So we did not do much suppression to the New World monkeys here. We did not suppress the lemurs here. So here's a little plot from 200 million years ago to today. Here's Pangaea broke up into Laurasia and Gondwana. Gondwana broke up into Africa and South America, Madagascar, Australia, Antarctica. And here's New Zealand over here. Look at how independent New Zealand was. If there was any type of selection pressure to get smarter and smarter, you would expect that during the 200 million years or 150 million years of independence in New Zealand, you'd expect something to get really, really smart and inhabit the intelligence niche. So Jared Diamond pointed this out. New Zealand is as close as we will get to the opportunity to study life on another planet. And you can see that here's New Zealand. It's kind of a big place that's kind of isolated. And here he is talking to Bill Clinton, probably being congratulated for his book, Why Sex is Fun. But what filled the intelligence niche in these continents? What filled those intelligence niches? Let's test this idea. Well, in New Zealand, what's the smartest thing in New Zealand that evolved there? Is it Kiwi or is it Tuatara? What's the smartest thing in Australia that evolved here for the past 100 million years? Is it this thing or this thing? How about in Madagascar? These seem to be the things with the biggest brains. And here's India and Asia, and here's South America. The point is that there is nothing that we currently consider there's evidence that that thing evolved towards the human-like intelligence niche. I take that as the best evidence we have to test this model, and the evidence says, no, it's not there. Sorry. I wish I could flatter you more. So there's a summary. So I think humans are unique, just like every other species on Earth. It makes no sense to concoct an imaginary set of which we were the only terrestrial member, and then suppose that biological evolution elsewhere in the universe evolves toward this set. This concoction is the Planet of the Apes hypothesis. It is testable. Paleoneurology, that's that Jerison plot, does not support it. Half a dozen multi-million-year experiments in vertebrate evolution are the best data we have to test it. They strongly suggest that there are no functionally equivalent humans in the universe. This explains the great silence. And yet I support SETI because when we have the technology to cheaply explore new parameter space, we should do it. I think null results are important. The universe may be stranger than we can imagine, and I may be wrong about everything I just said. So I may be wrong about the Planet of the Apes hypothesis. And just to finish up, I used to think the brain was the most important organ until I realized what was telling me that. So now it's time for, that's the end of my talk. Now it's time for some more questions. We have a little bit of time, don't we? Yes. Yes, we do. Okay. So I'm hoping you have some more questions.
Thanks, Charlie. So we still have time for 10, 15 minutes worth of questions. If you have any question, please raise your hand. Our staff will bring a microphone to you.
Your final point about the countries where intelligence hasn't evolved, that still gives us a
human-like intelligence.
Human-like intelligence. That still gives us a 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 chance that it
You're really
doesn't.
Holding on to that vanity there, huh?
I agree with you. That's a good point. That they haven't independently evolved into human-like intelligence. But
well, that's the only data we have. That's the
still got a 1 in 7 chance that planets out there.
Well, so what you're doing is saying, well, just because it didn't happen in these 6 cases that are independent, maybe it still could happen because I think it's a good idea. And
it happened in 1 in 7 out of 7.
Or 1 out of 100. Oh, sure.
Well, no, on Earth, 1 out of 7.
I know that, but the problem with that argument is that what you're doing is assuming that it's going to happen independent of the evidence, or the evidence that we have to apply to it is limited, as you point out, only 6. There are not 2 billion independent experiments, only 6. On the other hand, 6 is much, much larger than 0.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
0 is the result on the other side. So that's the point. I think you get the point.
Yeah. Fair enough. It's still 1 in 7.
6 is much larger than 0.
Yeah, following on to the last gentleman's argument, considering the Neanderthal, it seems that they were unfortunate to have been tracked into Europe by the folks that followed after them. If they had been isolated over in South America, perhaps they could have taken that track that we're looking for.
Well, I did 23andMe, and I found out that I'm 2.3% Neanderthal, and so are you probably, about the same. And that's interesting. It reminds me, though, of Jared Diamond's analysis of the Tasmanians. And he would say, oh, the last full-bred Tasmanian died like 100 years ago. On the other hand, there are many people who have lots of Tasmanian Aborigine blood in them, just like you and I have Neanderthal. So in that sense, Tasmanian Aborigines are not dead. They're alive in many people, but not at the full level, but they're mixed. And so there's lots of mixtures of Neanderthal in us. I don't know what that says about the sexual habits of these people who are pushing people around, but that's an active field of research. One point about the Neanderthal is that they had an encephalization quotient larger than we did. Now that's kind of interesting because, now I've been taken off, but if you look back at this Jerison plot, it doesn't plot Neanderthals. It conveniently forgets them because theirs is higher than ours. And on the other hand, what did I want to say on the other hand? So having a, encephalization quotient is a crude measure. It's something you can measure as a scientist. Remember, we like to measure things. But, it probably doesn't relate very closely to what you might call intelligence. Otherwise, we just have our brains measured and then go to respective schools, right? And they'd use brain measurements to divide us rather than, GRE tests and quizzes and what's the examination that 18-year-olds take here anyway. So those are my comments on Neanderthal. Now, some people say, oh, wait, Neanderthals are smarter. What about those? Isn't that independent evolution of intelligence? The answer is no. We have a common ancestor with Neanderthals about 600,000 years ago, maybe 800,000. That means we were the same. If here's life started 4 billion years ago, we're the same, and then right here, there's a tiny, tiny split. So essentially, we and Neanderthals are identical. Matter of fact, we can even interbreed probably, so it's not a different species. We're Homo sapiens sapiens, they're Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. There's argument, of course, about whether we are or not the same species, but we're very, very close. When you divide only about 800,000 years ago, you are essentially the same species, probably the same species. We know this because we look at hybrids. We look at, for example, chimpanzees. There are two types of chimpanzees, the bonobos, Pan peniscus and Pan troglodytes. And they divided about 2 million years ago. And when they have sex with each other, they have offspring. Whether that offspring is fertile or not is something that's still being tested. So even with 2 million years ago that you divide, you're still close to being the same species because hybrids don't really get sexually isolated until maybe 2 million, 3, 5, 10 million, that order of magnitude. And that's much longer than the time in which we and Neanderthals were independent. Right here.
You mentioned the eukaryotes, right? Yeah, and when you go right back, you said the root was where bacteria branched off. With that root, there was chemistry and then there was life. What was the spark that went from chemistry to life?
Well, the answer is we don't know, but we know a few things. One is that life requires free energy. Free energy is this fancy way of saying energy that can be used to do work, available energy. And so the earliest cells were single cells. There was no macroscopic multicellular life back then. It was all microscopic. And we know this by looking at the root. The root, there was not a big elephant at the root. It was a single-celled critter. And by looking at the phylogenetic trees, we get better and better evidence about what their physiology is. We do this by doing the following way. We look at all the different creatures like the bacteria and the archaea we can, and then we say, okay, what are the genes that are most widespread that become good candidates for being at the origin? And when you isolate that, and there's a nice paper, HUG 2016, it came out of the Bill Martin's group in Heidelberg, and they said, we've identified the deepest rooted genes. They tell us what the metabolism is, and the two that are the candidates are acetogens and methanogens. So methanogens are the ones that produce methane. They take CO2, they combine it with hydrogen and make methane, and then there's the acetogens, which produce water. They also take CO2, and they also use hydrogen. So by doing this type of analysis, it's kind of like top-down. It's not top-down. It's like today back into the past, we can make increasingly precise guesses about the nature of the root. When that's the case, then you can say, what was the geochemical gradient, the geochemical redox potential that those things had to live off of? One of the best candidates is hydrogen gas, having hydrogen gas around and there was CO2 around. So that's things we can say if those two metabolisms are at the root of the tree of life and how we got started. But these are new ideas. We're making a lot of progress, but it takes a lot of work to do. Essentially, bioinformatics is telling us of this. But the more whole genomes we get, and we're getting thousands and thousands, just like the planets are expanding, the number of whole genomes is expanding enormously, even faster than the number of planets. And so with that added those added genomes, we're getting more and more precise things we can say about the earliest common ancestor of all those genomes.
I think we have a question through social media.
Yeah, so I've had a few come through on social media, very much in the same realm as each other. So you said you support SETI. Do you suggest a change in methods for the search of life where we have to look for a different type of life or intelligence?
Well, I said I supported SETI because it's relatively cheap and because we're exploring new parameter space. So for example, Yuri Milner just gave $100 million to improve the sensitivity and analysis of signals from radio telescopes around the world. You also had to rent the largest radio telescopes. I support that, but I also support, in general, as scientists, when you have an instrument, use it to explore parameter space that has not yet been explored before. So for example, you could think of gravity waves. Maybe the aliens are talking with gravity waves. Okay, let's build an instrument that can detect with more sensitivity than the LIGO instrument and the advanced LIGO instrument now, which made a great discovery only recently. Neutrino detectors, maybe they talk to each other with neutrinos. Okay, let's build a really sensitive neutrino detector. So there's all kinds of parameter space that with a little bit more effort, we can analyze, and I guarantee you will find something weird and interesting, because that's the way the universe, that's always has been the case. Almost inevitably, when you increase the sensitivity of a current instrument, you find out all kinds of weird new stuff. And that's what drives science, and that's what I think will drive, that's why SETI is important, and not just say, hey, you're wasting your time, they don't exist. I think you're not wasting your time because you will probably, because you're exploring new parameter space, the hell with your motivation, who cares? You're exploring new parameter space. That's the Christopher Columbus. Christopher was wrong about the size, he got some money, and he went out, did a crazy thing, but boom, he discovered something. The microwave background, which I did my PhD on, same thing. These guys were trying to use a telescope. The telescope was designed to get reflection. They put up a big balloon, essentially a mylar balloon, sent up a signal, reflected off of it, and this telescope was designed to detect the signal that was reflected. Then some genius figured out, hey, you know what? I can put the transmitter up on the balloon. And then this telescope became obsolete, and so they said, here, have it, you radio astronomers, go look at the galaxy. So they looked at the galaxy, and after eliminating the possibility of pigeon poo, they said, hey, we got a signal here. And then some smart guys, Richard Dickey at Princeton, said, you've discovered the microwave background radiation. You've discovered the Big Bang. So serendipity and exploring new parameter space is what science is all about, I think. That's a long answer to that question.
You mentioned morality. Does your view...
I mentioned chirality?
Morality.
Morality, yes,
Yeah.
I did mention morality.
Does your view mean that we should pay a lot more attention to and value far more the biodiversity on the Earth? And if so, shouldn't our most important goal be the prevention of extinction of species?
I don't know about our most important goal, but I definitely agree with you that, I think somebody said, in order to love something, you have to understand it. And the trees that I'm showing you of all the phylogenetic trees of all life, and I think you should include viruses, then the more you understand them, the more you appreciate them. And if, right now, for example, many, many, many species are going extinct, and we don't even know they exist. So nobody cares about them, we don't even know. But with the methods that are now being used for phylogenetic trees, we're finding out that they do exist, and then we're finding, holy cow, this particular deodorant that I'm using is making this 10 species of bacteria go extinct. Who cares? Well, maybe those bacteria do something important that we don't know about yet. So the more we find out, the more I think we start to appreciate the biosphere, and the less human-centric we are. I think studying how we fit into the biosphere is an exercise in humility that I think can only help our efforts to maintain a sustainable Earth and not kill it. On the other hand, I also think we ought to explore for other planets, because I think probably, inevitably, we're going to ruin this planet, and we want to be a multi-planet species, as Elon Musk says. So I put my feet in both camps there.
Disappointing, because what you've said is that it's very unlikely we're going to find anything else. I find that disappointing, because from your view that you've expressed, it's morally, it's what we should be doing morally is to focus on what we know is extremely precious in the universe, and you know, that really should be our most important goal. If you seriously believe there is, you know, almost no chance of life being elsewhere in the universe.
I never said that my entire talk. I was talking about
No.
human-like intelligence. I never said what you just said.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, human-like intelligence. All right.
Yes, that was what
Okay.
I was referring to. Species-specific characteristic. Life in the universe? Maybe, yes. But the idea of having Superman in the universe that can have sex with Lois Lane? Stupid idea.
Rose, do you have a question? No?
Is it realistically possible for God?
Say that again, please?
I don't know. Is it realistically possible for God to exist?
Is it realistically possible for God? Well, I'm a scientist. Somebody asked me about my religious views, and I told them I was an animistic atheist. And the reason I say that is because when anthropologists contact uncontacted tribes, their religious values are almost always characterized by we literate people as animistic. That tells me that to be a human being is to be an animist. Then I have a rational part of my brain as a scientist that says, do you believe in all this stuff about gods? And I say, nah. And so I have two things inside of me. I'm a human being, therefore I think I'm a default animist. And then I have this rational part of me that says, get that out of here. That's my personal view. Everybody has a personal view.
Rose?
So another one from social media. You talked about how Earth, there's no evidence of colonization of Earth. How do we know that the archaeology and anthropological digs that we've done aren't from early life colonization and we've just kind of thought it's us?
Okay, so one of the most important ways we have of identifying material that has come from beyond the Earth are isotopic analyses. As a matter of fact, these people, if you're a policeman, you can do isotopic analyses of hydrogen H to D ratios, and do isotopic analyses of oxygen 16, 17, 18, and you can figure out what part of the world that drug grew. Because if you've made a whole map of the world and you find out the H to D ratio, the D means deuterium, H is hydrogen, so you have, hydrogen comes in 2 isotopes, oxygen comes in 3 isotopes, sulfur comes in like 5 isotopes. So if you look carefully at the relative abundances of these isotopes, you can figure out where on Earth they came from, or alternatively, if they came from beyond the Earth. Now, if you have a piece of a spacecraft from a UFO, bring it to a nearest isotope lab and have them analyze that. And they can tell you either it was made over in Manchester in this particular laboratory, or they can say it doesn't belong to the Earth. So we have very precise ways of telling whether something came from outer space or not, particularly if it's some type of artifact that somebody believes was left behind by a UFO. Crop circles, for example. If you're going to make a crop circle, I don't know, you have to cut it somehow. If you cut it, you're using some type of metal. If that metal will leave abundances whenever you brush something, whenever you cut your lawn, you're leaving some of the lawnmower behind in the grass. You get the fine thing, you get it like, I don't know, 1,000 atoms of iron, and you say, okay, what are the relative abundances of the isotopes? And you can say, oh, that lawnmower was from Earth. Or that lawnmower, wow, I didn't understand this. Maybe it's alien. So that's the type of tests we do. And as a scientist, I think most scientists are convinced that we have not yet been visited by alien spacecraft that we have any evidence for.
Okay. Let's thank Dr. Lineweaver one more time.
Thank
you very much. Okay. I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and I would like to invite you to a reception outside in the foyer. Thanks a lot.